everyone. My name is Eileen Dawn. I am host of the TheMsTexasShow. And welcome to the TheMsTexasShow. This is the show where we showcase lives of amazing survivors from traumatic events, including wartime traumas, family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault, as well as any other gender-based violences. We have a segment called Military Time, where we invite our guests who are in service now, as well as veterans, to come on and share their stories and what they're doing in the communities. And next we have Beautiful Ashes, and this is a wonderful segment where we invite our beauty pageant sisters who are winners and contestants who are now using their platforms to impact their communities. And also our artists, our dancers, our musicians, singers, last but not least, our beautiful warrior survivors who are making this huge impact in our communities and shining like butterflies soaring in the sky. If you would like to be a guest on the show, you can contact us by email msusatexas@gmail.com. You can also direct message us on Facebook with the same name, msusatexas.com. We're partnering with a nonprofit organization, Hope PYX Global, to provide services for human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault victims and survivors. We could use your help. If you want to donate, go to www.hopepyxglobal.org. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce our wonderful guest, MaryAnn Petrie. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor. I know that you're really busy, and we always say if you want to get things done, give it to the busy people. And we get Mary really short notice because she's a specialist about human trafficking, sex trafficking with the court system and the legal system. So she has so nicely and accepted this invitation. And so we're gonna cut right into the chase and introduce Marianne a little bit of many of the wonderful things that she does and let her tell more about the story that she does and her expert knowledge about that. So Marianne once was a registered nurse with a happy family, and she soon found herself fending off back-to-back accusations of child abuse while losing her children to a biased family court system, which eventually led her to parental alienation. She became a pro se litigant, appealing to the Superior Court with a victory that proves life-saving. And I know that Marianne and I spoke, I think was end of last year, and she was telling me that, you are still working on this and the court system. So you're the expert, and we're gonna leave it to you and tell us more about, your story and how you got into this.
Well, thank you for having me on again. And how you get into this is actually you get sucked into it, whether you like it or not. You may have a high conflict personality disorder that you have to deal with in the realm of court. And as Dr. Roseman had said, that it's like you're entering a Roman Colosseum when you enter the family courtroom. And a lot of parents don't know this when they get divorced, but they can mediate and not even set foot into a family courtroom. They could just do this on their own and co-parent together. But if you have a high conflict personality disorder, and that could be a borderline personality disorder, bipolar personality disorder, or as you mentioned early, narcissism, and there's so many variants to that as well. But when you are up against that, it's very hard to extract yourself out of the legal system. And this brings on major depression, anxiety, PTSD, and CPTSD. People don't realize this when you go into this courtroom, that you are going to be treated so badly. Even if you have an attorney, a judge may disrespect your attorney, or your judge and the opposing attorney may be in collusion together, and you're going to lose this case anyway. And along that goes with your children. And when children are ripped away from their parent, there was an article written about children being taken away from their parents at the border and how harmful that is to children and the high anxiety that causes. But, I know they're talking about children at the border, but what about our children in the family court system? And this is a family court system that is based on adversarial process that must be abolished soon. Families are being totally destroyed. And as Dr. Mark Roseman stated, this will affect 6 generations to follow. Because when you take a child away from a fit, loving parent, the other parent starts brainwashing the child, coercive control with the child to get them to hate the other parent, to fear the other parent. And it was written in the imprint Youth and Family News on October 25th, 2015. And the article is emotional abuse as harmful as physical and sexual abuse combined? And it is. And these
Wow.
parents don't know what they're doing to their own children by forcing them to hate the other parent. And unfortunately, the judges and the attorneys are also a part of this big problem.
Yeah, this is so devastating. I remember I had a post, and this is January Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And I think was right beginning of January, I had a post, and I had, one gentleman posted about the court system, how and the politicians that are involved in the human trafficking, sex trafficking. And and I know you for a long time, and through our advocates as well, including like for instance Bailey Smith, who is also a survivor. And you guys are both working wonderfully in the system about that, about fighting for our children, fighting for our parents about their rights, so that their children wouldn't have to be trafficked. So there are so many different causes that children can be pimped into sex trafficking. But how would we know? How would we know that our parents, I mean the abusive parent, and the court system could assist that for them to become a victim? Can you tell us more about that?
Well, in some instances, maybe a lot of instances, someone will make a false accusation. They will call CPS and make up um, a false sexual abuse, allege anything to get the other parent into trouble. And that parent then has to prove that they are innocent of this indication, this charge. And if they can't do that or afford to do that, and for instance, if a child is placed into foster care through CPS, they suddenly can become trafficked and sexually trafficked. These kids will be totally drugged up and moved to a foster home because they don't understand what's going on at any age, why they have been ripped away from their parent based on a false accusation. And there was a case study put out by the U.S. Inspector General's office that showed that nearly 1,000 Missouri foster kids went missing from the system in 2019. And the inspectors say that some foster kids are at a higher risk of going missing than others. And they say the state rarely made an attempt to reduce the risk of kids going missing. And no one really knows what happened to those kids. That was 2019. We're now in 2022. And no one bothered looking. There are good foster parents out there, but they're few and far between, which is very sad. CPS is far more responsible for the child trafficking system because they're the ones that come and take your child away.
Wow. I'm sitting here listening, and as you all know that I'm an advocate against sex trafficking and child abuse, child sexual abuse. And this is just like I'm having goosebumps just listening to this. These are our children, and children, they're innocent. And
Mhm.
you talk about emotional abuse, larger, the impact larger than physical abuse. These children, aces, adverse childhood experiences, their brains are not developed. They're not even built to handle those trauma, not to mention the additional trauma they have to go through family to family through the CPS system, for those foster children, foster parents and the families, etc. So I know that you mentioned earlier about the judges and the lawyers, and or together, that they are corrupting the system. So like if a person, whether, I hope they're not a victim, but there are so many divorce cases, especially after COVID, some the rates of domestic violence, so, and also the rates of divorce cases. And yes, I'm hopeful that there are more marriages as well, but what can people do to prevent that from happening?
Well, it's hard to when you marry someone, you don't expect them to turn on you in 5 years, 10 years. You don't know what lineage they have had in the last 800 years in their family. They could have some type of mental illness in their family that maybe they're not even aware of. And, if that happens and you have to divorce them, you are, setting yourself up for your child being taken away. Or, the state comes in, the judge comes in and will tell you how days will be divided. Once you get the government involved in your family life, you cannot get them out. And you will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting for your child, and they know that. And so that's why they like to keep this whole thing going in family court where there is no jury, there is no video cameras. I think there are video cameras allowed in Texas. However, in other states, there's no video cameras, no tamper-proof mics. So these judges who are actually child abusers in black robes get away with taking a child away based on a false accusation that was not even properly investigated. And then your child, of course, is going to experience this emotional and or physical trauma. And I'm sure you've heard of the ACE score. It's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and it's a tally on different types of abuse, neglect, and other hallmarks of a rough childhood. But these, uh, if you score high, greater than a 4, you as an individual will have medical problems. All this causes, anxiety causes, stomach ulcers, we'll say, for instance. It can cause a hallmark of different physical ailments in children growing up as adults. What also is troublesome is if a child has been through the foster care system and they age out of it, which means they've turned 18, they're essentially thrown out onto the street with no life skills. Some of them may have some life skills, some of them don't. But what happens is when they go to continue their life, when they go to get married and have a baby, then they have CPS knocking on their door wanting to take their baby. I've noticed this by
Wow.
talking with a lot of parents that have been in the foster care system, that they are now targeted and having their children taken away.
Wow, so it's not just the family court system, it's also the foster care system that are playing a part of their children taken away from them.
Mhm.
Wow. Uh, I don't even know, honestly, I don't even know where to begin now. So, these are our children. That's what I want to emphasize. And these are the things that's happening to us all the time. And I've been through like different trainings and webinars and things about, how the family are not able to get their children in time, and then the child died because the baby ended up in the abuser's hand. And whether, let's not even call it neglect, that the baby was very unfortunate and died. So how do you think, like, people, like whether they're just everyday people or whether they're now going through their divorce and they're going through, the family court system, or people, and I mean, obviously they don't want themselves to be caught by CPS, but if for whatever reason, caught by the CPS, what can they do?
Well, unfortunately, I mean, what I had to do was call a lawyer, because when you have one indication of false accusation that turns into an indication, you have to clear your name or you can't work with children. Even if it's an emotional abuse indication, you still have to clear your name, because you are lumped into the category of sexual child abusers, physical child abusers. And what happens very often is you will be cleared of one indication and there's another phone call being made and another accusation being made that you have to fight off. And some people have had 30 accusations called in and entertained by CPS at tax dollars expense. And CPS is a day late, a dollar short. They're chasing after false accusations when they should be finding children that are sexually abused.
I'm sure that, there's a lot of work that yet to be done. I know that when I spoke, when I first heard about your work in this area after we already met, I heard that you're already working, with the state and talking about that, and you're working with other advocates in different states working on that. Can you give us some updates, of what is the progress, what are being done right now or what has been done?
Well, I'm in the state of Pennsylvania, and as far as I know, nothing has been done. It's very hard to get anything done. I mainly focus on my podcasts and books that I'm writing. Um, as far as talking to judges and trying to talk to them, they really won't talk to you. I hate to say it, but they just, even, you send a letter of query and ask, for even 15 minutes, you're not even granted that. They don't want to hear about anything that goes on in these courtrooms because they know it's corrupt, in my opinion.
So is there anything that can be done then? I know bills and laws that you can maybe point out to that maybe our audience that are listening to that can write to their representatives,
Mhm.
how can we help?
How a parent can help is write down their story, but, you know, don't write a 20-page letter, just keep it to 2 pages or a page and a half, because these people don't have time to read a novel. And I know that sounds cruel, but this is how these politicians are. And if every parent continuously wrote their senator, their congressman, their representative, and keep telling their story, even if they mailed out a letter to the same person once a week. And if they all did it, flooded the office, maybe there could be something being done. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. It's just very hard. I know Pennsylvania was trying to pass a 50-50 shared parenting bill, and that's just sitting around. That bill has not done anything, hasn't been passed. The problem with that is that there's no accountability for these judges. There's problems with that bill. It sounds good, everything should start out 50-50, but there are problems with everything. One parent may have a domestic violence issue, and the judges, you know, they're not, they need to be educated much better. There's a film called Erasing Family by Ginger Gentile. And I think the judges and the attorneys should be watching this. And that involves the emotional abuse caused in the courtroom, basically, and how that leaves children years later. But there's no accountability when a parent is ordered to let the other parent visit with the child, and that parent goes for a pickup and the lights are on and no one's home, which happened in my case very frequently. You can't hold this person in contempt. The judge does not fine them. I know some parents want prison time for parents that withhold the child. I don't think prison is a good idea, because when a child goes to school, then they're made fun of because mom or dad is in prison. And that's highly traumatic. So I think if you hit a parent in the pocketbook for withholding a child and going against a judge's order, I think that would be the way to go. It just, some bills are heavily flawed. That bill is one of them. And that's House Bill 1397.
1397. So do you think, I see a lot of, I belong to, different support groups, and we also have a support group ourselves, Survivors Against Violence Everywhere, on Facebook. And, I saw a lot of the change.org links that people are sharing, including our wonderful advocate, Bailey Smith. And I think she just shared a couple this week. So, do you think that they can help with something like this? Like, someone can initiate a change.org, like a petition, or, are there anything our audiences can do?
And that would be great to help start a petition to reorganize this bill, to have this bill looked at and reworded much better, because 50-50 is not cookie cutter. We started out, in my case, with 50-50, and we were great for 10 years. Okay. So this is what happens. You can have good co-parenting pretty much for 10 years. And the kids were going back and forth between the houses for 10 years. Then when my ex met a woman who worked in the courthouse, unfortunately, I set them up on a blind date. It's really all my fault. But she became entangled, and she became a wedge between the co-parent relationship that I had with my ex-husband and my children. So she totally inserted herself and caused a lot of trouble. And then when I remarried, that's when it all ballooned out.
Yeah, it's like intertwined with the relationship, and that can be, especially co-parenting can be kind of messy, especially when it comes to children and parenting issues like that. But I know that you're doing great work. Like I mentioned that, not only are you doing the podcast, doing your books, which, we have done, going to show another show of yours talking about, the other great works that you're doing, and the book. I really love what you're doing and this, and for sure that, how can people contact you so that they can help you with these bills, the petition, and the advocacy work.
Oh, sure. I have a website, dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com. And I have parents writing to me there. I want to mention that co-parenting can be done if you've got two mentally healthy individuals that want good for the child and not use the child as a pawn to hurt the other parent. And I would like to see House Bill 1397 rewritten to be more not loosely written. These judges have to hold parents accountable. One of two things should happen. Either you abolish family court, take it down to the civil level, abolish CPS, and take that down to the civil level. It's just out of control right now.
I wanted to kind of revisit what you talked about, the A score, which, to many of you who are not familiar, it's adverse childhood experience score. And you mentioned that, if the score is higher than level 4, they could cause medical conditions. And, I witnessed this, one of our previous guests, Dr. Greg Williams, and which I can put on the link below, including MaryAnn's website so that you can reach out to her. He actually had, heart conditions that was caused from many years ago about his ACEs from, his parent and the sexual assault. And that's very unfortunate, but today he's like us, using our voices to or give the voices to our victims and survivors to impact more people to make the change. And I think, that's really important. But very unfortunately for the children, they don't understand. That's why I wanted to, kind of, maybe you can help us sort of relate that or emphasize that or explain to our audience about the relationship, about how they might become more vulnerable when they grow up, even if they are not a victim of sex trafficking now, but because of their vulnerability from what they have been through this system, they could become more vulnerable to be trafficked to sex trafficking in the future.
Mm-hmm. That as well as because they are insecure from what they've been through. They're more susceptible to suicide. And also, you mentioned a predictive risk of ischemic heart disease that is 360% higher than those people that don't have a high ACE score.
Wow.
Also,
360%. Wow.
360% higher. Also, parents that are being sucked through the system, and some will say, well, just don't go back to court, just don't go. It's when you're ordered to go to court, you have to go, and you may have, like I said, a high conflict personality that is issuing emergency petitions, and you have to be there to fight for your child. And the judges cannot differentiate what a high conflict personality disorder is, like sociopaths. As I said, borderline personality disorders. I know of someone, that had they had filed like over 30 motions in 1 week. Who does that? Someone with a problem does that. And the judge can't see that this is a problem.
So legally, please educate our audience. So is there something that can be done? Because I mean, obviously, as a common normal person, we will say that person is, crazy, just a layman's term, that, you file 30 motions, but some of them might not even be valid. Wouldn't that be the correct understanding? It was just like the impulse reaction of whatever, they thought at that moment to file that motion, whether it is, to initiate that motion or even be like the defensive part of replying to an existing motion. Like, in terms of the legality, what it is like. If let's say we have an audience, say me listening to that, and I have some file 30 motions, what do you suggest I should do?
You've got to somehow fight back. Some parents will go pro se, which means they represent themselves because they've essentially run out of money. And unfortunately, you're treated so badly as a pro se litigant uh, that it's what I had done is I had racked up credit cards and charge cards after until I got to the point where it's like I can't go anymore. I've got to represent myself. And the verbal abuse, the emotional abuse that these attorneys and judges put you through, in my opinion, it did cause me to have a heart attack. So you've got to be very careful when you are a pro se litigant. Self-care, like we had talked about, but there is no answer I can give you as far as when you are sucked into the family court to get out. I mean, some parents may sign off their rights to their child just to make things stop, or they're tricked into it. It's just very disgusting. It's a very disgusting courtroom to be in.
I come from a different background that, from China. So we always say that, once you're married, even this, I guess, let me do the like the translation. Direct translation is like, if you're husband and wife for even one night, then you are just like, husband and wife forever, regardless you're getting a divorce, not to mention you have a child together. So, to see that person who can just like turn their face against you and change their personality just 360 degrees, I can't even imagine. But this is the culture that we are living in. It's very unfortunate, but this is not just about us, this is about the children, because it's not just you are sucked into the system, the children are sucked into the system. Like Marianne, you talked about why you went to pro se. It's not like we want to go to pro se, our audience wanted to go pro se, but it's expensive. They charge you, right? As far as I understand, they charge you every, maybe depending on different attorneys. I have a lot of friends who are attorneys. They charge at least 15 minutes minimum. So even if you talk to them 5 minutes, then they're gonna charge you 15 minutes, and they're expensive. I don't even think that, especially with inflation now, but I think probably would say $300 an hour or something like that. So that's easily 15 minutes, $75 gone. And and it's not even about money. It's the problem solved. They're just delivering a message or you're responding, and it's back and forth. You spend $1,000 before you even finalize some kind of response to them. And then you're gonna do the whole fight. They're gonna go either negotiate with their attorney or with that person if they're pro se, or maybe sit down with the judge, and it's just like endless. And and for our people, I'm sure they wanted to hear some good news about it, some hope and some light about it. How it is something, and like you said, sometimes people are not like, I say in my culture, we don't sue each other. But if you are sued, you have to go and answer, the petition. You have to go to the court to attend the hearing. Otherwise, you're gonna receive the summary judgment, which the result will be against your benefit. So you have to do something. What is your best advice for people, to handle that? And you said, you suffer from heart attack from that. I can very well imagine that. What is your advice for people going through that right now?
Well, if a person is pro se, I would say be persistent, because I did win a case in the Superior Court, and that totally saved my life. We just had a very crazy child support judge, and none of this should have happened to begin with. This is all man-made debt. That never should have happened. And after I had had my heart attack and then I found out that I had won, I had to hire an attorney to go back into the lower court and fix this dollar amount this judge felt she had to have. And that's all based on government incentives, Title 4D, and people can Google that, but they're using our Social Security money not very wisely. However, that's another podcast in itself. Um, but I think being persistent, and if you can take the verbal abuse and the lies that the opposing attorney is constantly spewing out of their mouths, keep going. Just keep going because I had taken a case to federal court and the judge basically had said he did not read my exhibits and he ruled them irrelevant. So you can't get them to do anything. They can't even do their jobs. And, so I motioned for him to read the exhibits. So the next day he said he read all the exhibits. Don't ask me how he read exhibits A through V in 5 minutes. He didn't. He still didn't. I knew he was lying. And that's what they do. The whole court system, the family court system especially, is based on lies, false accusations, the silver bullet of calling someone mentally ill or a sexual child abuser. Those are the two silver bullets that people use on each other.
Wow.
And what a terrible thing for a child to go through, having to live through that. And some of them, if they do wake up and realize that they had been lied to, and they're made to feel guilty over something that should never have happened to begin with.
Totally. It was never their fault to begin with. A child or children, they're so innocent that they just unfortunately, because of the biological connection, they're kind of just put into that, like you said, into this mess, and they now have to suffer the consequences and become the victims. And you mentioned about medical problems, and we talked about their vulnerabilities, but I mean, these vulnerabilities, in addition to sex trafficking, I mean, their personal relationships, they can't hold a stable relationship from what they do. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, they have been so controlled by we'll say the opposing parent, and they can't even think for themselves. And this is where, you know, um, sexual abuse can come in because they will become promiscuous because they are looking for some type of relationship that doesn't exist. They can't think for themselves. They become promiscuous. They become alcoholics, some of them. And, unfortunately, some of these kids commit suicide. And these judges and these attorneys are allowing a high conflict personality disorder to cause all of this. This makes the judge and the opposing attorneys child abusers themselves. If they perpetuate it, they're taking part in it.
You mentioned about alcoholism, and I believe there might be even drugs involved in some situations, and suicidal. These are all like intertwined, as we mentioned earlier, because it's like one issue led to another. And I forgot which podcast and or book that I read. It's the brain trying to find a solution for that, to find dopamine, to feel good about it. So people have different ways. We talked about earlier about, I eat chocolate to make me feel good. You like chocolate too. And some people might just choose to get themselves numb from the pain through, let's say, alcohol, drugs. And some people say, I just cannot deal with it anymore. Then they choose to end their lives. And, when you mention suicide, it just ring the bell in my brain. I have a friend who lost his wife, who was a child sex abuse survivor, and incest survivor, and they got married and they have a child together, but after so many years, and the husband is very supportive, but one day she just, for whatever the reason, and nobody knows, she just chose to end her life because that is her way to end the pain.
Mhm.
And we ought to stop this. We ought to stop this. How can our audience help?
You know, it would be good if the school districts were aware, when they notice the not smiling or there's been a change in the child's behavior. They're sullen, they're just sitting, they're not happy and bubbly like her. Why not take the child into the school counselor and say, "Hey, what's going on?" Um, I just don't understand. You've got parents that will take a child into a child psychologist without telling the other parent. It's family counseling. But they'll take them into the child psychologist, and they will pull out judge's orders and whatever, and read this to the child with the child psychologist present, thinking that's all right, but that's actually causing the child more stress, distress, and anxiety. And another aspect of this is parents that are committing suicide over this, having a child ripped away for no reason. Um, you know, Parents are doing this too because they're getting backed up against the wall. They can't make the child support payment because it's been highly inflated due to the judge's discretion. This is a particularly deadly system they've got going. And, the thing also is these child psychologists have to be a more adept into emotional child abuse and what it does. And yeah, sure, they know what the ACEs scores are, but they're not digging deeper. If a parent were to show up to the child psychologist and the other parent doesn't show up like they were supposed to, then that child psychologist should be on the phone calling that other parent saying, "Where are you?"
Are they mandated to participate at the therapy together?
Um, Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But if, 2 parents show up and then all of a sudden one parent isn't showing up, that child psychologist has to start making the phone calls and not believing everything that comes out of the other parent's mouth.
Right. Because it's just one side of the story.
Right.
Wow, you made a very valid point, and you also made me think that, what do you think about the medical system? Because I mean, yeah, that's through the mental health, so that's probably more to the medical system category, if I may call it that way. Do you think that there's something that can be improved? I know that I mentioned about the grievance thing about one of the survivors that lost the mother of the child and the wife of the husband in the family, the core of the family. I know that the child was going through a lot of mental problems and having adverse behaviors, from the child himself. And what I heard the problem they're experiencing is they can get him to the therapist, but the therapist did not have the power to make a referral to the psychologist, being children cannot take certain meds, like psychology medicine, and they can only get the referral from the PCP. On the other hand, the PCP disagree with the approach to have him treated by the psychologist. So it's kind of like a dead end. So, what are your experience with that, and what are your advice?
Well, when you have a child that's very high anxiety because of this, I'm not a big fan of putting a child on an antidepressant, but sometimes it's needed just for maybe a couple of months to a year They don't want to keep kids on these. I mean, a normal psychiatrist does not want to keep the child on this. Um, it's very difficult when you know your child needs help and the other parent is in denial and refusing to help or help the situation. Again, you're dealing with, a parent that is fighting you on everything at all times. So the best thing also is to get yourself into counseling in order to deal with people that need counseling.
That's
And that
great
too,
advice.
yeah, and I mean, that too is a big part of self-care is, again, finding a psychologist that understands the court system and understands what goes on in there. And I was fortunate enough to have one that knew what goes on in there and knew that the judge that we had destroyed not just our family, but other families as well. And she had said, "You're not the only one whose family was destroyed by him." And, the validation that they can give you, but you go to the counselor, and the thing is when you're in a courtroom, when they hear that you see a counselor, then they start calling you mentally ill. It's
Right.
it's just a catch-22. It's like, "No, your honor, I'm going to counseling to deal with people that should be going to a counselor."
Wow. You just, keep mentioning so many valid points, finding a psychologist, understanding the court system. How can they find them? What are you experiencing finding someone's?
As far as trying to find a psychologist that has their act together, of course, you have to call your insurance company and they'll send you 100 names within the vicinity of where you live. So you have to start calling and, asking, are you aware of, the family court system? If they don't know anything about it, move on to the next one. And, just and if they do know the court system and maybe you don't click, then move on to the next one. There's always someone out there. There's a lid for every pot, so you will find the right psychologist that can help you.
That's wonderful. So basically, they have to do their own due diligence to do the research and to kind of validate that they have the experience so that
Mhm,
they can be a fit for treating them. That's very good point. And the other thing I wanted to ask, and I think it's so true, you said about catch-22. So is there even a way? I don't even know how to ask this question to avoid this because you are going to be called mentally ill when you are
mhm.
seeking, counseling. So what is the best, should I call, balance to deal with this situation?
Um, that is a very, um, thin tightrope, um, because you cannot say anything, which, as in hindsight, I would just wish I wasn't that honest. I just wish I wouldn't have brought up that. But I'm sure it would have been brought up at some point. But
Right.
when the opposing starts digging deeper and they want your records, that becomes a HIPAA violation. And then you have some judges who will just allow a HIPAA violation to take place and order your records to be turned over to an opposing attorney who doesn't know anything about psychology, who doesn't know any depression and anxiety because of going into court all the time.
Right. Yeah, that's a complete new, like, even the medical subject about the HIPAA violation. And I think it's really irrelevant about what is saying on the records, more of something that they can use against you in that
Mhm,
case, or against that parent who is being abused.
mhm,
There's so much like valid points, and unfortunately we're kind of running out of our time. So how,
mhm.
like, if our audience are still having trouble and have questions, I know you gave the website. Is that the best way for them to reach you at?
Yes, I tried, I definitely answer every email, and some I'll give my number and I can talk to parents. Some parents call me, some parents won't call me. But, as a pro se, I'm not a lawyer. I can just give you my opinion. I'm not a psychologist, but I can give you my opinion. But, be persistent. Don't give up in any way, shape, or form. And with self-care, you wanna take care of yourself because when your child does come back to you, you are in your best mental and physical condition.
I love it. Be persistent, never give up.
Mhm.
Is there any other takeaway that you would love to give our audience? I know you have filled our time with, so many valid points.
Um, well, try to stay out of family court. Try to mediate, if that can be done. If you or the other ex meet someone, it should be made clear that they stay out of the relationship that you have with your co-parent. I think that would be wise if boundaries are set and no one gets involved and just keep the situation as it was. You know what I mean? As it's going. Because if you can co-parent well together, you don't want a wedge coming in and destroying that. So when you meet someone, you just tell them this is between he and I, this is between she and I. And that's the way it is.
Right. I think the parent who is the direct parent should set the boundary. I think you're so right. They're the one who's the decision maker. Just like when you're in the line, someone cuts the line, but the register say, "Okay, I'll take you," but instead say, "Ma'am, there's a line," so that
Mhm,
other people wouldn't raise a fuss. I think it's the same situation here. This is so wonderful. And
mhm.
tell us a little bit about. I know that we have another interview of you, which we mentioned earlier, that's coming up later on. Just give us a quick intro of what you talk about, and obviously we're gonna put the link in the show as well, so that you'll be able to watch both of MaryAnn's wonderful experiences and everything. And I think that, like you said, the social security system, I think we're gonna bring you back on again, talk about so many other topics. Yes.
Definitely. The book I wrote, Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough. There's a lot of information in that. It's a really short book. It's like 150, 160 pages. But I do talk about Title 4D and the incentives with the Social Security money. Um, I talk about, the psychology of having a parent turn the child against the other parent. And there's a lot of takeaways in that book. And
That
going pro se.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And I'm so proud of you, for winning the Supreme Court case and going pro se. I know it's never easy. In addition to the burden, financial burden, it's the mental distress
Oh,
that you have to
yes.
go through. But you are certainly a warrior, like I said, if it wasn't for people like yourselves, that, we won't be able to bring the hope and the light to our audience. And thank you again, MaryAnn, for your wonderful time. And again, for giving us this short notice for taking on this interview. I think this will be so helpful for the prevention of our parents to, avoid those trouble from the court system and or the CPS and or the foster care system, so that we can protect our children from sex trafficking. Once again, you're watching the Miss Texas Show. Our show guest MaryAnn, and I am your host, Eileen Dong. Thank you again for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much, MaryAnn.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you so much.